Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Courage Effect. I am really excited for my guest today because this is somebody that is a friend and is also a former colleague of mine. And we have had conversations over the years about not just about how are we courageous, and I think a lot of what we talk about on this show is obviously how do we step into more courageous acts as humans. But a big part of that is how do we also allow others to be courageous? How do we create and contribute to spaces that allow people to step into their vulnerability, maybe these spaces that are uncertain, and give them the power and the bravery. So that is going to be our conversation today. And my conversation partner is Andreas Gebhard. Andreas is the CEO of Forward Momentum, a category design consulting firm that helps companies find their focus and become market leaders. He is also the COO of Hype 1000, whose platform, Hypecast, lets companies use products and audio for internal comms. Because let's face it, nobody really reads internal emails anymore. Andreas is a solid photographer and a decent guitar player. Those are his words, obviously. And he practices both enthusiastically. Andreas, it's great to have you here. Welcome to The Courage Effect.
Thank you very much for having me. This is exciting.
So I know that when we were talking, we really started talking about leadership, courage, how does courage show up in leadership? And you shared a specific story that I'd love for you to talk about with guests today or with our audience. But it's really, how do the courageous acts of others impact us? And I think that's a really nice place to start because it also allows us to realize how do we give rise to that, right? How do we support it? So I will leave that to you.
Good. Yeah, I think, what we talked about once and then, what piqued your curiosity there was a story where I said how somebody else's courage really basically elevated my leadership level, or how I at least perceive that. Ultimately, others have to judge that. But I think this was something that, a number of years ago, when we were actually still working at the same company together, it's fair to say that the company looked very homogenous. It was a relatively white, relatively male-dominated company. And I was leading a team of, I don't even remember, about 10 people or so. So this was before Black Lives Matter. This was before Me Too, before generally society was kind of talking more about diversity, equity, inclusion. HR teams, of course, were paying attention to that already. All of us were trying to pay attention to that to some extent, but it just wasn't top of mind, really. And this conversation, I don't even know how it started. It was kind of at the end of a team meeting, or I think it might have been a team meeting. And we were talking about how we had opened up a few additional recs to grow the team, to look for a few new hires. And one of my team members kind of quipped, that she was hoping that that would lead to a little more diversity. And we kind of left it at that. It was, a comment during that conversation. I looked over at her if she wanted to add anything, but there wasn't really anything. It was a quip, and that made sense. It was fine. And there was also the level of discourse within the team that was totally fine. And then, frankly, I didn't really think too much about it after that. But she did. And she took some time at some point, came up to me and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something that we talked about in the team meeting." And we took a few minutes, sat down, and she basically reiterated her wish and her hope that we would pay attention to diversity as we looked for new candidates, as we looked for people to expand the team. And I'm sure I was busy in my head with other things. Wasn't really prepared for this conversation. I also didn't really perceive us as not paying attention to that, right? And so I I think I said something to the extent of, well, we'll look at the applications that come in, and then we'll pick the best person that there is, and we'll go from there. And if there's the opportunity to add more diversity to the team, sure, we'll keep that in mind. And she got not angry, but she got really intense with me at that moment and said, that's what they all say. But if you want to achieve balance in an unbalanced system, you have to put your finger on the scale. You have to make sure that you're actively looking for these kinds of candidates, that you're actually actively pursuing some people that you might think would work. That you make sure that you not just look at whoever is knocking on the door, whoever is filling out the applications or sending in the applications, that you actually come up with an idea of what's missing in the team, in terms of equity and inclusivity, and then seek that out. And I was taken aback a little by that at that moment. First of all, like I said, I was probably busy in my head. I hadn't really focused on this or expected that kind of stern talking to. And I could also tell that she was a little uncomfortable because it was still relatively new. We hadn't really worked together all that long. She probably wasn't sure how I would take that. Mm-hmm. But it really mattered to her. And she really basically sat me down and gave me a talking to. And to this day, this is now many years ago, I am so grateful that she did, because for her to overcome her fears, or inhibitions in that moment, and to basically show the courage of setting her boss straight, that was a huge thing. It helped the team because, I actually listened to her, and we did seek out, other candidates. I think we did grow the team in a good, very inclusive way, as much as we could anyway. But it lingers on, right? This conversation, yeah, that this colleague may have long forgotten about by now, or that may have never really registered as so profound for her. I don't know. Still certainly lingers on in my mind. It is something that I impart when I mentor others these days. And it is something that I, still keep in mind, that yes, sometimes we need to, and this goes beyond just hiring. Sometimes we need to, tip this, maybe not tip the scales, but put the finger on the scales and actively work towards that which we say we want to achieve.
Yeah. It's a powerful story. And it's also powerful because, her stepping into that, her stepping up and really having the courage to do it, and you having the courage to give her the space and to listen. And it opened, I'm hearing that it really shifted your mindset.
It did. It really did. Probably not in the immediate aftermath. I think it probably took a while. It probably took a few conversations like you and I had, over coffee one day, of kind of revisiting this, of reviewing this. And in fact, it also probably took a little bit of feedback where somebody else says, wow, that's really something. Not everybody would do that. And yeah, it has definitely had an impact. It has, like I said, it lingers on, and that's the best kind of impact we can ever hope to have, right? That we leave people that we impart them with wisdom, and that they then actually take it with them and apply it here and there where it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and we don't really realize how much impact our courageous acts have beyond the immediate moment.
Absolutely true. fact, that's something that I sometimes hope we could see more often. It's when we work with others, when we mentor others, when we try to impart wisdom, when we try to be courageous in some way that is being courageous usually implies that it's uncomfortable, right? Otherwise, it would just be the thing that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it would be lovely to have an impact tracker to know what came out of that, right? I'm sorry. I've had one of the companies I work with. We just had conversations about impact tracking. It's a non-profit organization, and so that lingers in my mind. But it is true. It would be really cool if we could see, how that pans out. And sometimes we do by catching up with old mentees and old colleagues and just seeing what came of them.
Yeah, and asking for feedback obviously is a huge one. And I had people that have worked for me, and then we've had lunch years down the line, and then they've shared really wonderful things with me, like the impact that I had on them that I didn't know in the moment. And it's such a gift, but that doesn't actively happen. So how do we potentially create those moments for it to happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it comes down to intentionality, right? All of this is about being intentional, and thinking about things, and making time for things, be it picking up a phone, be it sending a note. I know I don't, and I sometimes wish I do, but I know some people, they schedule an hour in the morning and just send out little thank you notes to people. And if it takes them less than an hour, great, then they have a little bit of time left. And fantastic. It's a great idea. I've tried it here and there, and then I got busy with other things and, sucked into other vortexes and haven't really continued it much. But it's that intentionality. And also reaching out to old contacts around you. You know how for a while these 360-degree reviews were a thing in HR, and some companies really loved them and most employees really hated them.
I still do them actually in my work.
Fantastic.
But it has to be a valuable tool.
Well, because I was going to say, just like many other things, it took me a while to really learn the value of things. But when executed well and when done intentionally, these things can really be fantastic, because you can solicit feedback. You can solicit feedback about yourself from others. You can reach out to others and say, hey, how are you doing? How have you been since we last talked?
Yeah.
Did that thing that I did for you ever help you? Yeah. Why not? All these things.
I love that. We're going to cut to a break. When we come back, I'd love to talk a little bit more about that intentionality and how do we actually move it forward. And we also talked about the privilege of mentoring, the privilege of leading as well. So let's come back after the break and talk about that. You are listening to The Courage Effect. Stay tuned. Courage takes on many forms. I know from personal experience that one of the most courageous things we can do is to recognize when we need help and seek out support. If you're going through a hard time, feeling like something is interfering with your happiness or the ability to achieve your goals, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and accessible. It's an online platform where you can be matched with a professional therapist in as little as a few days. For more information and to get matched with a therapist, go to BetterHelp, that's HELP.com/courage. Visiting this link both supports this show and gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp.
Easy on the ears, good for the soul. Alternative Talk 1150.
Welcome back to The Courage Effect. This is Suzanne, and I'm in conversation with Andreas Gebhard. So Andreas and I have been talking about leadership and creating spaces and giving opportunity for the people that are on our teams and colleagues in general to step up into courage. And how do we respond to that? How do we allow them to feel safe in those spaces? And for us to not just listen, but to do something about it, to be intentional in how we approach our work and to create broader change as a result of it. And your story is so powerful, Andreas, because it's not just about you making a change, but it's bringing new people into the organization and truly changing the makeup of who is there and bringing in new thoughts, bringing in new people. So as we talk about the intentionality, how has that shown up for you more broadly in leadership? And when you think about the real privilege of sitting in the seat of a leader or a mentor?
Yeah, that's a wide question. And I'm actually gonna start by naming one name and saying thank you, because this intentionality and this safe space to actually say something, it starts with fostering a culture, well, of safety, of so that people know that when they do say something, when they do make a mistake, that they're not getting their head ripped off. Which unfortunately still to this day is very much the leadership style of many, many people for whatever reason. Either they don't know better or they do it intentionally. I would call that misguided, but either way, that is the reality for many people in many companies these days. And I was lucky enough to work for a leader who really made sure that in his organization and kind of under his view, it was totally normal to raise a hand and say, yeah, that was me. That screw up, that was me. I'm fixing it right now, but so everybody knows. And so thank you, Pancho, for really not just showing me how to lead others in that way, but also for allowing me to own my own screw-ups along the way. And I think that to me it's ultimately, in my view, the foundation for any of such conversation. Because if the person across from you really has to be scared, honestly, about opening their mouth, you're never going to hear the real truth about something. You're never going to hear the real crazy idea that really might just be, the missing link. And so, I'm not suggesting that you need to make it a free for all. You do need to provide guidance. You need to rein people in sometimes. You need to let them go on, sometimes a crazy idea walk and then come back and say, okay, that was fun, but now let's come back to what we need to do. That's all fine. But the idea of allowing a conversation and honestly assuming good intent for the duration of that conversation, I think that is so powerful. And that is frankly so easy. It's so easy and so many people miss it. So, if you're any one of our listeners, if you're in a leadership position, analyze how you deal with your people, your reports, the people that you mentor that do not report to you, the people that you interact with. And, do you assume good intent when they talk to you? Do you allow them to own their mistakes? I think that's a really key baseline thing.
I love that you mentioned that. It's so true, because we tend to come from the negativity bias of like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen, right? And we think, oh, people are going to go rogue and do all this stuff, whereas we don't put trust up front. And I mean, positive intent, I think, is such an important thing. So, yeah. And thank you for the shout out to Pancho Bernasconi. I'm also part of that fan club. So Pancho, if you're listening, thank you. Well, and Andreas, I know the work that you do now, you're challenging communication platforms in organizations. And I'd love for you to talk about that, because that is obviously driven by part of this passion that you have to make sure that people have a voice and there's psychological safety involved in that.
Yeah. I'll talk briefly about what we do at Hype 1000 or with Hypecast, this corporate audio platform. I don't want to turn this into a huge plug here, but what we do is we give leaders a voice, the ability to actually speak to their employees Hypecast is a corporate audio and internal communications platform that basically allows you to use podcasts to disseminate information. And that could be a podcast such as this, where two or more people are having a conversation about something. It could be just a voice message. We have tons of clients where the CEO loves this thing because on Sunday night, when they sit down to organize and prep for the week ahead, they just lift their voice notes app on the phone, talk for 5 minutes about what a great job Bob did last week and how we must really reel in that big fish client next week. And then they hand it off to internal comms. They stick a jingle in front and in the back. And then on Monday morning, the entire company has, the CEO's voice in their head and just hears from them. And the fun part about that is, when else do you ever get to really hear your boss's or the CEO's voice if you are the janitor or the guy in the construction line or, front of house dealing with clients in some way, shape, or form? And, in bigger companies, you always have these multiple layers of middle management. Everybody filters the message in some way or another. And then the C-levels wonder why the people at the bottom never execute what the C-levels talked about. Well, because they don't know, right? Yeah. And so today, everybody sends internal emails. Everybody knows what they look like. Nobody reads them. It's a mess. And everybody wonders, how do we communicate? But how do we reach the people we need to reach? And what we built with Hypecast is really, it's fun. It challenges those assumptions. And it is, frankly, courageous in the sense, for the people who buy it or who decide to switch to it, because just buying a better email system, that's not courageous. That's just, that's just a variant of the status quo. Yeah. And switching to something else entirely and asking, how can we, how can we really have an impact and how can we really make a change in the way we communicate? That makes a difference. And then if you have podcasts where you interview other people in the company, you hear other voices, you hear other accents, you hear other, the voices can transport so much emotion and emphasis that is so hard to do unless you're a truly gifted writer to get across in writing. So that is, we often talk to the people who make the decisions to buy that. And we realize that they are being courageous in some of these instances.
And it's having the courage to not do things the same way that we've always done it.
Exactly. Which is also what I encounter with the forward momentum clients. Category design is fundamentally about being different than anybody else. It's about, making a huge impact, really making sure that people see you as different. And that takes a ton of courage. It's scary for some, but it's fun to do. But you talked about the privilege of mentoring others. That's really what it comes down to for me. Be it mentoring, be it in advisory or client. If somebody allows you to voice your opinion or a factual statement, if somebody allows you to speak to them and chooses to listen to you, I think we're well advised to be intentional about that and to make the best of it for them and for us.
Yeah, well, and I'm also hearing investing in what people are saying and really listening to and having that mutual respect as well as the intent.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, so good. A few final things as we wrap up that I really heard you say that resonated with me are, the big one, which I don't think is a surprise, is assuming good intent and positive intent. And I think that also allows us to realize that we don't always have the right answer.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely another way of saying that. And yes, I agree.
And I love that I love the story. I love it didn't necessarily start off as something that was comfortable for you, but you allowed yourself to not just have the conversation, but reflect on it. And you continue to reflect on it. And that's why you're still talking about it today. So thank you for doing that. And also really letting other people's courage impact our leadership, letting it change potentially how we think and how we do things and the tools that we use. And just because we've done it that way, just because we're comfortable doing it, doesn't mean that it's the most effective.
Absolutely.
Great. So, Andreas, it's such a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think we're just gonna drop an email in the show notes. If they're listening, info@forwardmomentum.llc is probably the best way to reach out.
Okay.
And it'll get to me from there.
Okay. Any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I think we covered. I mean, we could keep on talking about this for another 3 hours, I think. But I think we hit on the key points. I would, don't rip people's heads off. Give them a safe space to grow and to do their thing. And talk to them.
Yep. Listen and be open. So, and good, positive intent. Such a pleasure, Andreas. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Stay courageous.